Hello, everyone. Welcome back again. I am Shannon Ortez from Light After Loss. We are a support system for survivors of suicide loss, and all month we have been doing informational interviews with some amazing guests. I've had a lot of fun, especially during the shutdown, and not connecting with people. Just to connect virtually has been awesome. So today I have Corey Miner-Smith with us. I am super excited about this interview. So stay tuned, got lots of good questions, amazing information and resources from her. So welcome, Corey Miner-Smith. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm fine. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time. I am going to be completely honest because that's the way I roll. I think I said a little prayer before I sent you a message because I'm like, she's so busy and doing so many amazing things. She may say no, and that may break my heart. So the fact that you got back to me, and we are recording on Memorial Day. So on top of it, a holiday, you're taking the time to talk with me. So we are just so grateful to have you. Thank you so much. So
thank you for all that you're doing. This is really a benefit to the community at large, and just opening the door for the safe space for people to communicate and to receive valuable information that can help them, and their families in the long run. So thank you for your commitment to what you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much. It has been quite the journey. And I always started off like, this is going to be a small nonprofit. And that I don't think that's even possible at this point. It really was a gap. I knew there was a gap. I didn't realize how big. And so just grateful for all the community support, especially in my own journey, and then being able to give back. So thank you. I appreciate that. So mental health awareness. I know mental health is very personal to you. So talk about your story in some sense.
Yeah, in some sense, I was around 14 years old when my mother was first diagnosed with manic depression, paranoid schizophrenia. By the time I was 15, she had exhibited symptoms to the degree that she left me in Houston, Texas, and returned to Ohio. And I remained there living with a family to try to finish the school year. I was not able to, and I ended up moving to Ohio as well. By the time I was 16, my mother had attacked me in one of her unfortunate states of psychosis, which led me to be in the family court, determining where I would move to next. So luckily, and praise God, my paternal grandmother took me in, making it my approximately 14th home, and Timken Senior High School being my, let me change that, my 8th home, my 14th school, and 3rd state. I also lived in California, so Ohio, Texas, and California. Many of these things, attributable to my mother's mental illness, and also just what is common in a lot of communities, and that is having a transient lifestyle. We did move a lot, much more than 14 times, unfortunately, but some of that is just, the socioeconomic status of a lot of individuals in our community, and just trying to make ends meet and moving where the rent may be lower or opportunities hopefully are better, and sometimes they're not. So it just causes a lot of moving, a lot of transition. And sometimes people can make it through those things. Other times they're overwhelmed by their stressors and succumb to them in some kind of way. And also just the impact on the children we don't necessarily hear about many times. So I openly share my story as one of those children who went through a lot of these different ills, societal ills, due to the decisions of my parents, and ultimately making some of those same choices until I realized that I wanted more for my life, and doing all I could to make that happen for myself. And then ultimately, when I did have my own family, for my children.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons why, I really wanted to connect with you, because everybody loves a comeback story. And you talk about the realities of mental health and how that impacted you as a kid, and all of the moving and transition, but ultimately not letting that keep you down. It's like about the comeback and overcoming obstacles. And, very much my story as well. I would have never in a million years imagined myself in this position, but not letting it define me, and really, finding a purpose for the pain is what I call it. Yes. So, and you can't talk about mental health awareness without minority mental health. So knowing that that is your story and all about empowering people to come back from that, being able to talk about minority mental health and how to navigate that system. So talk about what you're doing now. How has all of that story, what are you doing now to encourage people to come back?
Yes. Well, I consider it, advocacy like many people do, but taking it a step further from just talking about it and bringing more awareness to actually taking action in whatever capacity that you're able to. With me being a lawyer, I wanted to find out what could I do more? Can I help, have legislation passed, testify before any bodies of government that make these decisions in regards to the funding and research regarding mental illness, because it is critical. As I learn more and more about severe mental illness, being that my mother experiences symptoms of schizophrenia, which is a severe mental illness, there's not a lot of research. There's research, but there could be a lot more research in regards to treatment, different types of medication that may do better than those that are in place now and have been for several years now. Especially when you have schizophrenia, for example, described in thirds. A third of the individuals that experience symptoms related to schizophrenia may have one bout of symptoms and never have any symptoms again. Other individuals in the second category, like my mother, may be in and out of mental institutions for the rest of their lives, on and off of the medication. It's just a vicious cycle, unfortunately, but that's why it's important to have network and connections and relationships with the mental health services that are available in the community so that you can effectively help your loved one who may be experiencing severe mental illness. And the third of those who experience severe mental illness, schizophrenia specifically, are those that we may see living on the streets who are untreated, not in any type of services or connected with any type of services, and unfortunately may succumb to their own hands through suicide or be killed by someone else. So it's important just to understand the severity of mental illness in the grand scheme of things. I see it now as I continue to read about it, like on a spectrum. It's, mild to severe cases within each disorder. So while someone who may have depression may never experience the symptoms that are related to severe mental illness, like hallucinations and delusions and anonagnosia, which a person lacks awareness of their mental illness. So if you're not aware that you're ill, why would you take the medication? Why would you believe that you need help when you're not sick? And unfortunately, that just causes so many issues when a person doesn't know that they're sick. And this is different than just being in denial, which I was in denial for a very long time in regards to my mother. Just going to the mental hospital for the first time, just seeing the other people that were there, I felt like my mother did not belong there. She was not that sick. She wasn't sick, like this. Like, why is she here? So it does take growth and evolution within yourself to want to know more information, and then using that information to help others, not just talking about it, but also taking action in whatever capacity you can.
Yeah, so ultimately getting involved at the ground level to create change in policies and procedures and research, because we can't make policies and procedures if we don't really know how to address the problem to begin with. So really, it's awesome that you've been able to access the ground level and make some changes there, because without those changes, it's hard to move forward. So this isn't new, minority mental health. Talk about some of the history. How did it come about? Where has it been? Where is it going?
Yes, well, absolutely. I admire an author by the name of B.B. Moore Campbell. And as I learned more about her and read some of her books, I understood her impact in the mental health space. She was a big advocate for NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, in the Los Angeles area, so much so that after her death, legislation was passed to have July designated as the month for Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. And for those who are TV buffs, especially in the 90s like me, you may recall a TV show called In the House. It starred LL Cool J and Debbie Allen. And Debbie Allen was a single mom with 2 children. She had a son and a daughter. And LL Cool J kind of was like the nanny, if you will, kind of like Who's the Boss, if you remember that show as well.
Oh, yeah.
So on that show, the daughter, her real life name is Maya Campbell, is the real life daughter of B.B. Moore Campbell. And it was on that show that Maya started to show signs of mental illness. And her mother became a big advocate in trying to help her own daughter, but ultimately helping the larger community with her advocacy. And being a New York Times bestselling author, she had a big voice, and she used it for the benefit of those who are living with mental illness. So July is Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. And in my opinion, mental illness is a 365 global issue, and we need to address it and talk about it and work towards improving our mental health care system every day. But I truly appreciate the days, the months, and the weeks that are designated for particular subjects involved with mental health, like, Suicide Prevention Month, or right now in May being National Mental Health Awareness Month. And we have weeks designated in October, and we have World Mental Health Day in October. So I appreciate all of those things because it does bring awareness. All of the celebrities and well-known individuals who are open and sharing their personal journeys with bipolar or depression or whatever it may be. I hope that it helps people to relate and understand and know that this is something that's real. It's here, it's not going away, but we can all help each other to live the highest quality of life possible with investing in treatment efforts and research efforts to improve the lives of those who are living with mental illness, and especially severe mental illness.
Yeah, and all of those, I feel like every month or every week there is something which really gives those of us who are advocates a voice to talk about it. Silence perpetuates the stigma. If we're not talking about it, we're certainly not solving it. So being able to continue the dialogue, educate people, get them resources, so they too can then become advocates. So it keeps the dialogue going. Talk about some of the specific barriers for the minority community when it comes to accessing care and mental health. What are some of those barriers that we need to be aware of?
Well, some of them are, our own cultural barriers. A lot of people in the African American community don't want to rely or believe they need to rely on therapy and other mental health services in order to address everyday stressors that tend to be more prevalent in African American communities. As for example, just going through this COVID-19 situation, and a lot of people for the first time losing their jobs, not knowing how to make ends meet. That has been something that's been prevalent in the African American community throughout history, dealing with life stressors every day of not necessarily knowing when your next meal is going to be, having parents that may be absent from the home because of work. A part of it, of taking an active effort in your mental health, is being able to tap into the resources. But if you need to put food on your table, the priorities may shift to the needs of your family versus the needs of yourself. And so, in my case, my mother had at least 2 jobs all the time. So that left me home alone as a latchkey child a lot. But that's not new, in the African American community, as well as others. But you have these thoughts and stereotypes that are also associated with mental health concerns, and the word choices that are used tends to help people not want to be associated with it, or perhaps they have a family member who they don't necessarily want to associate with because of the behaviors that person exhibits. And also just the church. It is a instrumental, valuable resource in the African American community throughout history, a place of worship, but also a place of discussion, a place of, even in slavery times, the subliminal messaging that may have taken place to help slaves escape took place in the church. And so many believe that you are to go to church, that you are to pray, rely on the Lord to help you through any issues that you may face, that therapy is not for us, it's for them, if you will, other communities, non-Black communities. but it's imperative that the church be a part of the resources that are available, that we know as African Americans that we can rely on God, we can rely on prayer, we can, leave it at the altar, and also supplement that with therapy or other mental health services that are available, even if it's medication, in order for us to live the highest quality of life that we possibly can, because that's what God will want for us, in my opinion, for us to live the highest quality of life. People have dedicated their lives, their educational careers to learning about these things for the benefit of others. And that's a resource that I believe, God has made available for us to use. But in any community, it's important overall to know what it is that you need to excel in your life. And some of the cultural barriers may be believing that no counselor would be able to relate to the African American experience, especially if that person is not African American. So one, term that you may hear often is culturally competent. And that's not just in regards to a person's race, but even our idiosyncrasies or limited thought processes, or just being stuck in what we see around us rather than knowing that there is a whole world out there. How can the counselor tap into those limitations without imposing his or her personal values and views on this person that's coming to them for services? So it's important for both sides, both the mental health service provider as well as those who may come in to seek services, to be able to work together, to understand whatever boundaries may be there, and ultimately for the professional to be able to tap into that and help a person to evolve in their lives.
Yeah, and being able to, so I have a newfound appreciation for lived experience. I think as a clinician, and then flipping that coin, okay, now I'm a suicide survivor. I never imagined I know both sides of that coin. I have a greater appreciation for that lived experience, which is why Light After Loss is a survivor supporting survivor, because you can only read and know so much.
Right.
But the lived experience, if you've been there, you've walked the walk. So I think it's really important that we have minority mental health counselors, because I can learn so much and be as culturally competent as I possibly can, but that lived experience really does just bridge that gap. So I encourage, especially community mental health and mental health agencies, to have that minority mental health piece involved. Whether it's on
is critical too in regards to the lived experience, because just because a person is African American doesn't necessarily mean that they have lived a predominant number of the African American experience. For example, people may think, just not knowing my story at all, but seeing me as an attorney and former elected official and whatever these other titles are that may have plucked me out of this world of what is known as the African American experience, people may not think that I'm able to relate. I'm too far removed from the experience to know or understand. And that's what's important, because even if I am far removed, I can't impose my newfound values and my newfound lifestyle on a person who is experiencing it now. You have to meet that person where he or she is to help them to evolve into whatever the goals are for themselves, and overcoming whatever symptoms they may be facing, and realizing that even in this experience that they're currently living, they still are able to excel out of it. And most importantly, being able to manage their stressors, manage whatever may cause their symptoms. And in regards to severe mental illness, the medication piece, because a lot of people are very object to medication. But with severe mental illness, without it, a person can suffer some very extreme, serious symptoms that can be dangerous not only for themselves, but for other people. So it is important to understand the cultural competence piece and how it may play into a situation, because just because the counselor is Black and the client is Black doesn't necessarily mean that there's cultural competence that's going to bring them together and help the client to move forward.
Yeah, well said. I would agree with that. Kind of going back a little bit, also touching on faith. So my next interview actually is talking about the role of faith in recovery, because that is something that we do run into, is that it seems as though the stronger connection with faith at the church, then there is less willingness to rely on a counselor. And I have, like, one of the favorite stickers I have in my planner is, you can have Jesus and a therapist too. It's like one of my favorite things. And she's going to definitely talk about the balance between, yes, relying on God and faith, but then also praying your way to your counseling appointment, and that balance. So I'm so glad that you touched on that.
Or just praying for the right counselor, because even without there being, mental illness involved, and you're just looking for a counselor just to help you in your everyday life. I know a part of your position is, I saw it posted on your Facebook page, but mental health being a part of your overall physical health. I appreciate that concept, because our brains are a part of our bodies. Our brains control everything we do with our bodies. And so it is essential that we not only think about our physical health, but our mental health, meaning you can do a mental health assessment or inventory. Doesn't mean that you are mentally ill or have a severe mental illness, but that you are caring about it and doing things, putting things in place like boundaries to help you to manage, to help you to live the highest quality of life that you can, and knowing how you can address whatever problems or issues that you may face in your life. So yes, it's just so important for us to take advantage of the services that are available. And it doesn't make us less of a Christian or not believing in God because we choose to use some other services that are available to us.
Yeah, and I personally believe that God has put some of those people with those gifts here for us. I mean, some of the counselors that I know are just amazing at what they do, and I feel like that's a God-given gift. And for them not to be able to share it and not to be able to use that, I feel like it's somewhat sad. So absolutely let them use their gifts and believe 100% in mental wellness. So even on my good days, I'm still doing things to maintain my mental wellness. I'm doing yoga, I'm exercising, trying to eat right, which has been difficult, during the shutdown and with children, but doing my best. So, always doing those things to kind of maintain my mental wellness and my physical wellness. It's all interconnected. The thought that we are three separate things seems to be it just doesn't make sense. So leading right into, and I told you before we even, kind of met virtually, privilege, knowing, okay, we talked about the barriers. One of the hot topics and things that I certainly kind of get passionate about is privilege. And that's just because I feel like I never realized how much of what I said as a counselor or as an advocate or a suicide prevention person was said out of privilege. And until my life was flipped upside down, and I felt like with that came a lot of that privilege, like, oh, now that I'm in it, that's easier said than done. So talk about privilege in minority mental health.
Well, I think also you had asked in one of your other questions, just some of the barriers, but that could be it as well. Lack of access or no access to healthcare in general, let alone mental health care services. Many times we're in impoverished communities. I mean, that's pretty much what I grew up in, impoverished communities, and there's just a lack of food, nutritious food, which is important for overall health. Living in food deserts, something I'm passionate about, and helping to address that in the community, as well as our education system, making, when you compare the schools throughout Stark County, for example, based on the zip code, the school, and that school may have, lower test scores or lower report card grades from the state and things of that nature, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the quality of lives need to reflect, how a grading system works from the state. We need to make sure that our students are equipped with the things that they need, whether that's healthcare, mental or physical, in the school system as a part of the program, because many times they may not be able to get to a doctor, with their parent or guardian. the insurance coverage. Some insurance, whether you're on Medicaid or Medicare, may not cover mental health services, which is very unfortunate because it's that very population that qualifies for that type of financial benefit or insurance benefit that may need mental health services, especially now in light of this coronavirus and the shutdown and people experiencing stressors that they had not experienced before, and then turn into alcohol or drugs to have the symptoms or the stress subside. But also just with privilege, I see it just in my situation with my mother. My mother, nobody, by name would not know that she's my mother, right? My mother can call or seek out services and whatnot, and she may not be able to get through, or people may not call her back, or she's waiting for someone to return her call, or whatever the case may be. I have found it very beneficial for someone to have an advocate, someone to speak on their behalf, someone to go to the meetings with them, help them to find housing, help to work with the treatment team or whoever it may be, whether that's out of privilege or whatever the case may be. A person who is actually experiencing, in my case with my mother, severe mental illness, who may not be able to communicate as effectively or recall information that's critical for the care that an organization is trying to establish for her, it's important for someone with privilege to be able to work and communicate on her behalf or others' behalf in that regard. But I guess it's the way you would look at the privilege, because as I see it right now, especially being an African American, a lot of the privilege discussion that's taking place in regards to politics and just socioeconomic injustice is specifically and directly related to race, whites versus blacks, the privilege that white Americans have had throughout this country's history versus African Americans who never have had an equal playing field in regards to anything. Many African Americans have been able to excel, but there are a lot more who have not, and it's because of institutionalized racism, whether it's in the school system, in the workplace, wherever it may be. And when it comes to healthcare, we see it right now with the coronavirus and African Americans being disproportionately impacted by the coronavirus, that the healthcare facilities are not readily available in their local areas within a reasonable distance from where they live, the testing not being available. And yes, being more susceptible because of the underlying health conditions, but again, that's attributable to locations and where they may live, areas of lack, food deserts, already, again, not having the healthcare systems in place. And now where you could go for healthcare, those are overwhelmed with cases of the coronavirus. So it's critical to look at this and what perspective of privilege we're discussing, because it's divergent, right? But in regards to mental health and using that privilege as a positive, I offer the example of being an advocate like I am for my mother. Any privilege I may have, whether that's because people may know me more or I'm able to communicate more effectively than my mom is at some given time, that hopefully helps to provide the access necessary that she needs, to provide the help that she needs, even when she doesn't know she needs the help or wants the help. I can fill in those gaps for her with whatever, just even having the privilege because it's a desire to help her, right? That could be a privilege as well, especially in those times when my mom may lack insight and awareness of her illness.
Yeah, and so on Mental Illness or Mental Health Awareness Day, I went and I recorded live. And one of the things I said was, if you're doing okay, lean out. And that just means if you're doing okay, and that includes myself, that's because I do in some sense still have privilege. I'm okay. I'm doing okay. My basic needs are met. I don't worry about those. Don't worry about my girls. And so I'm okay. And so I lean out, and being able to reach others and be an advocate and help those who are struggling with some of the basic needs, the food. And that kind of goes back to, if the Maslow hierarchy of needs, if I'm not eating and not sleeping and all my basic needs are not being met, there's no way I'm going to even be able to think about my mental health because I'm just trying to survive. So
Absolutely.
being able, with my privilege that I still have, lean out. So those people who are struggling with some of their basic needs, are a little less stressed. So I like the fact that being able to use the privilege to be an advocate and be the voice. Are there any systems set up for someone who, say it is severe mental illness and they don't necessarily have the voice to be able to go access care? Is there something out there where they can get an advocate? How does that work?
You know what? Unfortunately, the introduction to it is maybe because their behaviors had led them to an encounter with the police. And that's a critical first stage that police officers who are involved in these types of arrest or calls, that they are trained. There's a crisis intervention team, and many officers are trained to be a part of that, trained to de-escalate a situation, trained to know to take a person to the hospital rather than jail, and helping that person in that way. If you will, that's like maybe the first step into help, being taken to the hospital and having that assessment. And at that assessment, individuals from the local behavioral health community programs will come to the hospital to also be a part of that assessment for the individual, and whether that individual is ultimately released to the community and now connected to services that he or she can follow up. Just like when you're released from the emergency room, they say follow up with your primary care physician. You can follow up with the local mental health community program to engage in the services and start the ball rolling, if you will, with that. Or if they are then transferred to the mental health hospital, that whatever services that are put in place, medications that may be administered, will continue on once that person is released. And also another part of this is housing, because if a person doesn't have a place to live, it's critical that they work with organizations that can help them, like ICANN, like Coleman Professional Services, help them to find housing, because many times the behaviors can cause lease violations and a person is evicted. And once you have a eviction on your record, it leads to 2, 3, or whatever others, and it makes it less likely that individuals, private landlords, will rent to a person alone without there being a mental illness in as a factor, but just seeing a history of evictions, because it's likely that whatever caused the eviction, non-payment or rent or whatever, could happen in their place. So it's critical to work with the organizations, because they are advocates on behalf of this person, have a network of housing providers that they tend to work with that are more accommodating for individuals that have mental illness. So those are just some of the ways that at least two factors that are involved with introducing a person to services. And then it is critical. The third part is whoever the family members are, or that one loved one, friend or family that's willing to be there for the person, to be an advocate, because they may fall victim to their symptoms again, whether it's because they stop taking the medication, stop engaging with the community service providers, whatever, or get in trouble legally again. It's important for someone to be involved, to be able to connect the pieces and help the treatment team, help law enforcement, or whoever it is, to assist this person in the most effective way possible. And most importantly, to keep them connected with the services that are available.
Yeah, so one of our previous interviews was actually with Major CJ Stantz and Aaron Ivers from CIT. I've been involved in that and feel like it's a valuable program, because that is true. A lot of times our folks, especially severe mental illness, that's how they get involved with services in the beginning, is because they're in crisis, the police are called, a CIT officer assess the situation, they end up at the hospital or at the crisis center and get linked with services. And I think it's important to note something you said, that, when you say mental health services, a lot of people think, well, that's counseling. Mm-hmm. Community mental health services we have amazing services, wraparound services, case management. They help with housing. They help with all of those things. Again, if I'm worried about where I'm going to live, going to counseling and medication is way down the list. So being able to help with the whole picture, the mental health services is not just medication and counseling. It's, access to all of those things that are going to help you.
Right. Plus housing, plus food, plus work if the person wants to work.
Yes, they have job programs. It is a whole kit and caboodle of things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the family engagement piece. I think there has been study after study that the more the family is involved in the treatment and, being able to manage the symptoms and keep the housing going and counseling going and all of those pieces, the more a family is engaged, the better the outcome. I think NAMI, our local NAMI Stark County, is phenomenal at being able to engage the family in the recovery piece and how to support your loved one and, how to navigate the system. I think a lot of families are just intimidated. They don't know where to start. They don't know who to talk to. So to have somebody who can help you guide and navigate the system is a phenomenal program as well.
Absolutely. And just a part of the education, some family members, just give up. It is a stressful situation. I'm not in any way suggesting that just because you know about the resources that are available or connect with the services that everything is going to be hunky-dory and a smooth sail. Absolutely not. I talk about in my book, #Driven, some of the very raw graphic details of this experience with my mother living with severe mental illness and how I ultimately, wanted to know more, like, how can I help? Because as her only child, unfortunately, I am the subject of her psychosis many times. So whether it's good or bad, some of the hallucinations, whether they're good or bad, but if she believes that something is not right, it's my fault, or I created the situation in some kind of way, or I know about it and I should explain it to her, but I don't. Right? So it's imperative for that person who is going to advocate and be there for their loved one that he or she understands boundaries that they may need in their own lives, because not only do you have the everyday stressors of your own life, whether that's work, family, play, church, whatever it is, you're taking on the stressors of another person as well. And you have to understand when it's necessary to cut it off or when to step back, when to allow the community caseworkers and the ACT team, if you're working with the ACT team, to allow them to do their part to engage and to also create a buffer between you and the loved one, especially in situations where you're the one that's being blamed for a lot of things they believe that is going on. Ultimately, I know that my love for my mother is far beyond all of this stuff, for the danger sometimes that I feel I may be in, which, going out on the streets to get her off of the street, I have been in, and I don't suggest anybody doing that type of thing, but my love for her just outweighs any of the risk that may be involved. And so I just do what I can and have learned to do what I can, and more importantly, learned to have boundaries, because I have been in a place where I didn't think I was going to be able to bounce back, if you will, trying to be there for my mother. So it's important to understand those boundaries and the services, because you don't have to do it alone. You're not in this by yourself. I strongly encourage people to engage with the community organizations that are here in this area.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate for, you can't pour from an empty cup. So if you in some way as a caregiver have to be filling your cup. So kind of a personal side note, the reason I went into mental health, because I watched my mom, her youngest brother was diagnosed bipolar with psychotic features, schizophrenia. They kind of bounced back and forth. And my youth was watching her manage, because she was his primary caretaker, his advocate, driving him back and forth to the mental hospital, in and out of jail, the whole thing, her going out on the streets to find him, and just being able to sit back as a kid. And once I got, a little older in my later teens, I sat back and was like, this system is so broken. I can't just sit back and, let the system stay this way. So it really, the reason I went into mental health, and just because being able to feel bad for my mom, but also feel bad for my uncle, who, when he was well, was an amazing human and
Right.
had so much love. But then when he was off of his medication and some of those symptoms, my mom was the brunt, kind of very
Yeah.
much like you.
Mhm.
So, kind of going back, talking a little bit about the pandemic, I know in COVID-19, how that impact, you're already in a system that you struggle with the daily stressors, and then add COVID-19 on top of that. So about a year ago, a SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Governing Agency, released a study on the rise of African American youth in attempting suicide, completing suicide. The means were becoming more lethal, and that was a year ago, before COVID-19. We are seeing the suicide rate increase. We are seeing the overdose rate increase. So, and that's just in the general population. Add minority mental health and some of the barriers on top of that. Are you seeing anything, hearing anything? What do you have to say about this current situation?
Yeah, I actually read a recent article by a Black psychologist, Dr. Rita Walker. She has a book that just came out this year for Mental Health Awareness Month, May 1st. Her book was released, The Unapologetic Guide to Black Mental Health. And I actually have it right here.
Nice. I'll have to add that to my list.
Yeah, but it's about navigating an unequal system, learn tools for emotional wellness, and get the help you deserve. And came right on time, because again, just like with mental health, with suicide, it's not a Black thing. A lot of people believe, it's not something we do. And for children to be able to have the opportunity to go to their parent or loved one, guardian, to talk about their feelings is so important. But as you talked about earlier, you're worried about working, putting food on the table, all of these overwhelming issues that may be dealt with on a daily basis. Nobody has time to necessarily care about their feelings. I grew up feeling that way. I dismissed my feelings all the time because it didn't seem like anybody cared about them. So why should I care about them either?
Right.
So with youth, it's important that they have that outlet, and it's important that we allow them to feel safe in letting people know how they feel, because just because they're not talking about it doesn't mean that they're not feeling it, doesn't mean that they aren't experiencing some level of sadness, worry. With the bullying situation, we've seen young African-American children as young as 9 and maybe, younger, killing themselves because of how they're treated at school, because of their hair, because of their skin color. Racism at its worst in children is so very unfortunate. So it is important to accept that suicide, it doesn't discriminate either. It can happen in any community, and it may happen even more in communities where a person is not in a safe space, not safe like physically going to be harmed, but just safe space and feeling that you're able to communicate about how you're feeling. It made make a tremendous difference in someone's life. And even if you're not experiencing, overwhelming stress, it doesn't mean that you may not be subject to having suicidal ideations. I mean, we recently read about a emergency room doctor that committed suicide, and according to her family, she didn't have any mental health concerns throughout her life. And an emergency room technician also committed suicide, and it seems to be, from things that I've read, directly related to the impact that the COVID-19 patients had on them, the suffering that they saw, the overwhelming number of individuals who were coming in for treatment, and the medical community not being equipped to handle it all. So then you add on, those who are already having mental health issues and concerns and or disorders, who already needed the help. For example, close to half U.S. adults have experienced mental illness in the last year, right? Only maybe 41 to 43% actually seek treatment for it. For the African American community, that's as low as 30% that actually go and seek treatment for their mental health concerns. So it's important to talk about it, to bring the awareness. And in regards to the action that I talked about earlier, for those who are experiencing, to take action in getting yourself help. regardless of the stressors that you may feel, because at this point, they've made it so much easier. Just using your cell phone. Everybody nowadays, even kids, have cell phones, and they can text, NAMI to 741-741, or even contacting the suicide prevention hotline right from their phones and talking to someone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just calling and talking to someone confidentially, to communicate, express how you're feeling, and hopefully helping you to resolve whatever may be overwhelming to you at that particular moment.
Yeah, and our first conversation was with Brittany from Crisis Center, talking about mobile response. And again, I think Stark County, we go above and beyond when it comes to crisis. And I focused on the fact that crisis is self-defined, that calling or texting the National Lifeline, or, it doesn't have to be a suicidal ideation kind of crisis, even if you just need to talk to somebody because you're worried about paying your bills, you're worried about finding a job. And knowing, kind of putting my suicide prevention hat on, loss is one of the number one triggers. Now, suicide is super complicated. There's a lot of pieces to the puzzle, but loss is usually the one that, okay, there's all this going on. Now I've lost my job. Right. Now I've lost this. And beginning to feel like things are spiraling and it's becoming hopeless. Where, loss is almost the straw that breaks the camel's back. In COVID-19, that is loss. In some sense, we've lost, connection with our friends, connection with our family. We've lost jobs. So it's taking something that's already brewing and just throwing gas on the fire in some sense.
In some situations, there's a loss of safety because a person may be in the same household with their abuser more than they would if they were able to leave the house to go to work or wherever their safe place may be throughout the day. So it's critical to know about those resources, even with domestic violence, even with food and alternative shelter opportunities, because they're available. And some of the things that can help reduce some of the stress is knowing about resources that are available. So maybe if you call one of these numbers, they're available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They can let you know of resources that you didn't even know, places that are giving out food discreetly, or helping you with your rental assistance and mortgage payments and things of that nature, because people are experiencing losses for the first time. They may not have been in this situation ever before, or because they have been in these situations, throughout their lives, is even worse now. So it's putting them in a bad place where they may not be able to use those same coping strategies and tools as before. Go get another job so you can help make ends meet, or sell some things on the side to help things. That's not working right now because we can't be out and about and doing things as we were before. So yes, I say to take advantage of the numbers, especially because it's confidential. So if you do have any type of shame or guilt or feeling that you should be able to handle this on your own, nobody has to know that you called. You're calling for yourself and calling for help that you may need at that time.
Yeah, and something I learned from Brittany, and again, I was like, I did not even know this, that the 452-6000 number, which is the local crisis number for Stark County, really answers all of the lines after hours. The homeless hotline, the opiate, they answer the National Lifeline. So when in doubt, call that number. And I will put all the numbers at the end of this interview for people. Like, if you don't know where to go, if you call that number, they'll tell you where you need to go. So it is a crisis lifeline, but it is a lifeline for all things. So don't hesitate to call. And again, it is confidential. And they also follow up. It is not just a one and done. If you connect with them, they will follow up with you to make sure you did get connected, because that's sometimes the biggest barrier too. Well, I called that number and nobody's called me back, or I can't get through. So they're going to follow up with you and make sure you did get connected. So I think that's an important thing for people to realize, that this number is an important number, not just because if you're having suicidal thoughts, is a lifeline for all things. So I will put that at the end of this interview. So what can we do as Light After Loss, as NAMI Stark County, as whoever we are in Stark County? what can we do to help and advocate for minority mental health?
Well, I appreciate NAMI. I saw on the website that they have a program called Sharing Hope, where African is specifically targeted to African American community, and African Americans are able to share their stories, which again, I believe, personal stories, as you had mentioned earlier, are really impactful. They give a sense of, wow, okay, that person made it. This is how they did it. In my case, I first went to movies to try to learn and understand about what my mom was experiencing. And the first one that I saw was Out of Darkness by, but starring Diana Ross. It was a TV movie. And in the midst of her medical school career, she started showing signs of severe mental illness. But my thing was, what did the family do? I was trying to learn, how does the family help, or can the family help this person to move forward in his or her life? So I believe it's important for organizations to take the active approach to want to directly communicate with particular communities within their community. For example, having things in Spanish, having things in other languages when there is a presence of other languages in our community. We need to be able to attract those individuals and know that these services are for him or her as well. Reaching out to places that they go, places of worship or community centers that are focused on their culture and their heritage. That's what makes a critical difference in outreach, in my opinion. And it doesn't necessarily have to be minority outreach. It's just a part of your outreach programming, right?
Right.
The pictures that you use, are there only white Caucasians in the pictures? Or are you making them diverse? People with disabilities, people who are from other countries, people, just making the marketing plan inclusive of all individuals, throughout the community. And specifically for African Americans, understanding and learning the cultural differences, what may be more attractive, if you will, to have African Americans to engage in the services. Everybody doesn't go in and sit on, or are thinking to go in and sit on a couch and tell all of their problems. So what are some other effective ways of providing services that will still get you your numbers? Because as we know, the numbers are what are critical for organizations to be funded. And if a African-American program is not showing the numbers that are needed, maybe don't think that it's African Americans not wanting it. Maybe it's your service that you're providing. While it may be effective in the white community or some other community, it's not effective in the African-American community. So instead of just nixing that program, how about revamping it to be more connected to the African-American experience? And understanding, consulting with individuals with lived experience. What would help you to engage in the services that we are wanting to provide for your community? And at the same time, knowing there's no one size fits all program. Just because one African American gives you consultation or advice or suggestions doesn't mean that's going to be applicable to everyone. So it's best to do a cross reference, a sampling of individuals that can help you put something together that's more likely than not to attract African American clients. And even with the peer-to-peer support groups, just making those types of things inclusive. I participated in the family that NAMI offers. Very informative, just very helpful. And I look forward to the opportunity of giving it to become a facilitator for that, because it's just helpful. And so engaging individuals to volunteer is critical, because if those are the individuals that can go out to, for example, the African American community, say, hey, these services are available. I'm like you, they helped me and my family, and they can help you and your family as well. And you don't have to be ashamed of it. You don't have to feel guilty about it. These things are here to help you.
Yeah, I love the fact that you talked about the personal stories, and knowing that I'm not alone. I think that alone, like when you tell your story, I tell my story, people just all of a sudden, oh, I'm not alone, and I don't have to be ashamed. So for the first about 18 months after my husband took his life, I really tried hard to pretend I was okay, because that's what I do. I just put on a face, I'm going to be okay, it's going to be all right. But really, until I took that mask off and said, I'm not okay, I'm struggling, and this is what it means to be a lost survivor, did people just really start to connect.
Mm-hmm.
And, just doing what we do and being, people email or send messages that you've given me hope, that this is, I'm going to be okay. And I'm not doing anything. I'm not even going to say you're doing okay. I'm just walking the walk and talking the talk. So when we have our board and we develop programs, that personal experience, that lived experience is so important to me. Even if I'm a lost survivor and I lost my husband, I need somebody on the board who's lost their child or who's lost their sibling, because it is a different experience. There are similarities, but we want to target and serve the African American community and serve the LGBTQ plus community, because those are high risk populations. But I am not going to think I know how to develop that program without somebody who has that voice. I have true love and appreciation for lived experience that I've never had. I think, again, that it's kind of stripping away that privilege that I thought I knew, but I really don't know. And having those people, be a voice and through their experience, be able to connect with others so we can make good programming. So kind of, you touched on, the church. How do we address the barrier? If that is a cultural piece in the link to the church, how do we get churches to really, I guess, advocate for going to counseling, advocate for taking medication? If you have severe mental illness, it's a huge piece of the puzzle. How do we get churches involved in the conversation?
I say to call them up. Many churches have a person designated for community relations and things of that nature, things that the church is going to do in the community. What I have found is many pastors are directly, like their main full-time job is in mental health. Whether they themselves are case managers or counselors, psychiatrists, they are directly involved in it already. So I believe creating those opportunities to collaborate. Sometimes churches allow individuals to come in for, a presentation of some sort. I know I've seen it with insurance companies, and it may not even be during the church day, but on a Saturday or something, to let their parishioners know of, just estate planning opportunities, because it's essential knowledge that we should have. And that's the same with mental health programming and services. And I strongly suggest, collaborating, because there may be an automatic thought, well, they're Black, they may not want to do mental health because, they just want to stay in the church. Well, don't let that be a barrier to your organization asking, right? And then one pastor can communicate with another pastor and, bringing them together to collaborate. How can we collaborate? Especially with this coronavirus situation. And, we see that there is a significant need, an increase in, the suicides or the increase in services being needed. How can we collaborate by reaching your members, having your church involved in notifying the members about the services, and that ultimately helping the members to know it's okay to reach out to these services. That's what they're there for. Doesn't mean you don't go to church anymore. Doesn't mean that you don't pray anymore, but you have these services as well. And I think a strong voice is coming from the church, the pastor, or someone affiliated with the church to collaborate with your organization.
Awesome advice. I like that. All right. Coming full circle. What is your best advice for someone who is trying to help a family member, someone they love, with mental illness? And it is a spectrum. That could be, anxiety, depression, all the way up to schizophrenia, severe mental illness. What can we do to support our loved ones who are struggling?
Well, you know what? I'm going to read right from my book, #Driven. And I have 5 suggestions to help families and friends that have a loved one living with mental illness. Number 1 is to pray. Have that a part of your everyday involvement with your loved one. Number 2, educate yourself about the illness or illnesses and have realistic expectations. I just came to this realization this Mother's Day. I was working on an article that I submitted to a online magazine. I think I've been looking for a fairy tale ending, a happily ever after. And I came to the realization that there may never be a happily ever after. It is what it is. And my loved one, as well as anyone else's loved one, may never be who they were before their symptoms started to show. And we have to be okay with that. We have to develop and adapt our relationship with that person to be inclusive of the symptoms that they may have at any given time. So have realistic expectations. Number 3, maintain current contact information for local mental health and law enforcement resources. We talked about CIT officers and the ACT team and case managers. Have current information, because as we see with the mental health redesign that took place in Ohio, some places aren't here anymore. And that left a lot of people not knowing where to go or knowing that if anything was available. So those organizations that are in existence, it's important for them to have community relations and marketing plans to get their information out so people know that they're here and here to serve and to help with mental health services. So keep current contact information. Whenever the number changes, find out what it is and make sure you know it, or the name of the organization. You know, I remember Nova Behavioral Health. How many years ago was that? That building now on 9th Street. So just knowing, keeping up to date on that. Number 4, reach out for support, even for yourself. It's okay to go to counseling. And I now can authentically say that because I didn't like counseling. You know, I said at 16, my mother had attacked me. The school or the court, whoever, you know, had me go to counseling. I might have went to 2 or 3 sessions. It just wasn't for me. I didn't want to be in touch with my feelings at that time. You know, I tried it again when I was in law school. It wasn't for me at that time. So the 3rd time was a charm in that I go regularly, and I found out how it can be effective for me, like not just going when I'm in crisis because my mother's in crisis, but to go regularly to maintain the skills and tools I need to manage when I do have an escalated event in my life or in crisis. And work closely with your loved one's treatment team. That's number 5. That's right in line with knowing who they are. You got to keep current contact information. But as a part of your loved one's treatment team, who are those members? You know, the caseworker, the ACT team members, nurses, doctors, as well as perhaps you have a payee. If your family member is one who is not able to manage money on his or her own, or also a guardian. Those services are available, and many people don't know about that. You have to go through the court system, but a guardian can be appointed to help provide the stability that your loved one may need. So ultimately, you know, if you or your loved one has someone that is living with severe mental illness, and I specify severe because it can be the most devastating situation for some of the extreme symptoms that are involved. I do recommend NAMI because it is an organization that I have had direct involvement with. As I said, I went through, at that time, it was 12 weeks, family to family support, which was just invaluable to me. We earlier talked about texting NAMI to 741-741. That 741-741 reaches a lot of different organizations, but you can text to NAMI to get to that organization that's local for you. Or 1-800-950-6264 to call, or to go to the website, and you can find out all about the different programs and activities that are available through NAMI at nami.org. So that's all available in #driven, which is my debut motivational memoir, but I use it as a resource for families and friends that have a loved one living with severe mental illness.
Yes, it is in some sense your comeback story, and in giving people all of the resources to kind of write their own comeback story. And I love the fact that you said set realistic expectations. Speaking of hashtags, one of our hashtags is love people where they are. Yeah. That, you know, accepting anybody where they are, you know, in their journey sometimes really is just showing up. I don't have any magical words to fix it. I don't have any magical pills. There is no magic involved.
Not
So
at all.
just being able to show up, and I am going to love you wherever you are on any given day, and it's going to be okay. That, love is bigger than all of this, and being able to.
Absolutely. The love is essential. It definitely tests you as a person, especially if you have been put in situations of fear and just not knowing, So I do have available for your audience a free newsletter. It is called 5 essential keys, actually 5 essential keys to loving a loved one with severe mental illness. And so anyone can go to CoreyEmpowers.com and sign up and receive it. It gives you great 5 keys to just be your baseline knowledge to helping you, to introduce you to learning more about mental illness, learning more about how you can relate effectively with your loved one, and just seek the help that you and or your loved one may need. So it's 5 essential keys to loving a loved one with severe mental illness, and you can get it at CoreyEmpowers.com.
And is that the best way for people to get in touch with you if they feel like, okay, I need to know more, there's something they can relate to your story and need some of those resources? Is that the best way to get in contact with you?
Yeah, I'm available on multiple platforms.
You are.
Instagram, Facebook, as well as people call me. I have a business line. It's 330-452-9937. But a lot of people take advantage of social media and inboxing me and things like that, and I do respond.
You do respond, because that's how I got in contact with you.
Thank you.
So again, I thank you so much for taking your time today. This information is just invaluable, I think, to individuals, to families, to organizations like Light After Loss. You're such a powerful voice, amazing comeback story, and being able to kind of overcome. It's not easy, and I can attest to that yes, I've come a long way, but there are some really hard days still, and that's okay. When I'm not okay and you can't lean out, I definitely lean in. Going to a therapist, even though I am, doing a lot better, I still go in for my mental wellness, and I call it my oil change. And so being able to maintain all the things that got me here don't just magically disappear, that this is something you have to maintain and keep up with. So I appreciate all the resources and information you gave today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to come on to your platform and advocate and share information. It's been my honor and pleasure, and I truly appreciate the invitation and you reaching out to me.
You're very, very welcome. And I know we have been in the same room together, so next time I'll make sure I come up and say hi and we actually meet face to face. So I'll make sure I do that next time.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Wow, just wow. What an amazing story and valuable information. If you tuned in, I hope you got as much out of it as I did. Thank you, Corey Miner-Smith. I'm really kind of disappointed that I've worked in Stark County for over a decade and this is the first time we've connected. Certainly going to make sure we stay connected. What a valuable resource. If you want to connect with Corey, I literally messaged her on Facebook, super professional. Yes, I know. She got right back to me and has been so responsive, not to mention gracious with her time. You can reach her pretty much on every social media platform at Corey Empowers, and the best resource is really going to her website, CoreyEmpowers.com. Lots of good stuff on there, and also a way to buy her book, #Driven. Highly recommend that. You can also sign up to get the 5 essential keys to loving a loved one with severe mental illness, which are also in the book. So much information in 1 hour, crammed in. Hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like, save, and share this video as a resource. Be well. So during the interview, Corey touched on being culturally competent. So I did want to add a slide here and kind of reiterate what cultural competence is. And this is from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS.gov. And just key considerations when it comes to being culturally competent. Corey made a good point that just because an African American goes to an African American counselor doesn't mean that that person is absolutely going to understand where the other person is coming from. It really comes down to culture being more than just race. It's about geographic location, it's about gender, it's about a whole lot of things. It's about personal experience. So, like when I said, as a survivor of suicide loss, I lost my husband. That doesn't necessarily mean I know exactly what someone who lost their child or lost their sibling is going to know. So being able to have those common conversations that bring us together, a conversation about how are we the same, but how are we different? Which means how can I help you? Because what may work for me may not work for you, and that's okay, but how can I help you? And then diversity on the community part of the planning. So I talked about this as well on our board. Before I'm going to make programs for the LGBTQ plus community or a minority community, I'm certainly going to have that voice on my board. I have the voice of someone who lost their child. Being able to have those different voices at the table a part of the planning, because I know that just because I have this experience doesn't mean it's across the board the same. And then having that cross-cultural interaction between recipients and program staff. And it really comes down to relationships. It always, no matter what I've learned through my journey, it all comes down to relationships. Knowing that, I don't know much about you or your situation or how I can help you, but if we interact and I do get to know you and we get to have those kind of organic conversations, then I'm certainly going to know how better to serve you and meet you where you're at. I kind of mentioned that in the interview as well. Love people where they are, no matter where they are. Love people right there, and being able to walk with them and be with them and just show up. Sometimes that's half the battle. If you or someone you know needs support services 24/7, here are some of the lifelines that we mentioned during the video. The Coleman Crisis Center is Stark County, 452-6000. They have a mobile response team, so if you need somebody to come out due to a mental health situation, they can do that. The National Suicide Lifeline, 1-800-273-TALK. Military and veterans, press 1. If you are more apt to text, you can text the crisis line for HOPE 741-741. Military and veterans can text 838-255. Again, if you're going to hurt yourself or someone else, call 911 or one of these lifelines. Or if you just are looking for support through a difficult time, you can also call these numbers. If you're not experiencing a mental health crisis but need other support, here are some other support lines. The National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233. The Homeless Hotline, 330-452-4363. And then if you don't know what you need, you can always just call Stark Help Central, and they will navigate you to the right person, the right direction, the right number. They can help you navigate some of that. 330-455-6644. Supporting those who are supporting someone with mental health is a big piece of the puzzle, as Corey mentioned when discussing the mental illness of her mother. The best way to do that is to connect with your local NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness organization. NAMI Stark County, 330-455-6264. NAMI Summit, 330-252-1188, or you can even text NAMI to 741-741. As I mentioned in the video, you can't pour from an empty cup, so if you are taking care of someone and helping them with their mental health, you have to take care of your own mental health as well. They offer free support groups, one specifically, Family to Family. It's open and free to those supporting someone with mental illness, and a great way to learn and connect with others going through this similar situation. Last but not least, if you are a survivor of suicide loss, you can contact Light After Loss at 330-846-3630. We are a support system for survivors of suicide loss, survivors supporting survivors. We have free support groups, morning events, education and training. really just walking with survivors of suicide loss in their journey. Again, feel to contact us if you feel like you need some extra support. You do not have to navigate it alone. If you need a little light, take it. If you have a little light, give it. That way nobody will ever walk in darkness.